A boy sat by the window, watching a butterfly flutter past. As he stared, he mused over the butterfly effect. How a single choice could supposedly change the fate of humanity. Ridiculous, he thought. After all, his choices so far had only led to regret. Just then, a voice called out, snapping him from his thoughts. "Honey?" The soft, feminine tone startled him. A moment later, she spoke again, this time with impatience. "Are you even listening?" She went on, explaining that she knew he was in there. After all, she had already checked with Ophelia, the lodge house master, and confirmed he had no classes today. Her voice sharpened with irritation. "Are you really planning to ignore me to the very end?" Panic set in. His mind raced. Of all the persistent people in the world, there was no stalker quite like the one standing outside his door. Dud remained frozen, hoping she'd give up and leave. Instead, her voice rang out, warning that if he wouldn't open the door, she'd just cut her way through. A second later, steel met wood, and with terrifying force, her weapon pierced straight through the door. His panic skyrocketed. She was actually crazy. His voice cracked as he shouted that what she was doing had to be against the rules. And besides, the student council president was the one who enforced punishments, not. Too bad for him. She was the student council president. Before he could process that nightmare, the door was sliced to pieces. She stepped inside, eyes sharp, completely unfazed by the destruction she had just caused. Then, with a tone far too casual for someone who had just committed dorm murder, she informed him that he had been avoiding her. Not just once or twice, but exactly 32 times. Dud's mind blanked. She had been keeping count. Then, with an unreadable expression, she said his name. "Dud Campbell, I have a question for you." His instincts screamed at him to run. His body refused to move. Then she said it. "Marry me." His soul nearly left his body. Elnor, wait. Don't just throw out insane things like that. Just as Dud was about to protest, another voice cut in, addressing Elnor as princess and demanding to know what exactly she was saying to him. By the window, a woman with purple hair and cat ears, Sarah's, sighed dramatically, lounging as if she had been there the whole time. She added that she couldn't believe a princess would covet a man who was already taken, then casually asked if this was just how royal families operated. That nearly jumped out his skin. Sarah's was here too. Elnor, however, barely reacted. Instead, she turned to Sarah's, raising a brow, and asked what an assassin like her was doing in such a bright place, especially with so many witnesses around. Sarah's, completely unfazed, replied that eliminating witnesses was part of her creed. Dud's survival instinct screamed that he was in serious danger. Sweating, he quickly told them both to wait. He hadn't even thought about marriage, and this was all way too much. And then, the roof exploded. A woman crashed through, leaving a gaping hole behind her. Dust settled, and two sets of eyes immediately locked onto the new arrival, while Dud's panic reached new heights. Lilu stood confidently amidst the wreckage, fixing her gaze on him. Without hesitation, she announced that he should live with her. Dud's mind short-circuited. As if that wasn't enough, Lilu casually added that the wedding preparations were already set, so all he had to do now was come along. Before he could even process that insanity, another figure appeared. Yuria, making an entrance just as flashy as Lilas, scoffed at her words and declared them incredibly rude. Dud, meanwhile, sat frozen, barely processing his rapidly crumbling sanity. Yuria crossed her arms, fixing Dud with a sharp look as she dramatically addressed him as Sir Dud. With a sigh, she demanded to know what kind of life he was leading to be surrounded by so many snobs. And as his fiancée, she absolutely would not let this slide. Dud, already struggling to comprehend the madness, barely had time to process when, of course, it got worse. A sudden rush of wind announced the arrival of Fainal, swooping in on a flying broom like she owned the place. She barely glanced at the chaos before calling the rest of the women jealous fools and telling them to shut up. With a smug grin, she declared that Dud Campbell belonged to her. Elnor, calmly taking in the escalating disaster, mused that this had officially turned into a competition. Sarah's, lounging by the window, lazily muttered that Elnor was delusional. Lilu, completely ignoring the others, was still laser-focused on Dud, demanding to know if he was coming with her or not. Yuria, rolling her eyes, insisted that Dud should reject everyone, except for her, obviously. Fainal, smirking, declared that since things were already set in stone, there was only one way this could end. Tension crackled in the air. Then all at once they charged. Dud, now officially trapped in a war zone, barely dodged flying limbs and incoming spells as he shouted over the madness, demanding to know why they were too busy trash-talking each other instead of, explaining what the hell was actually happening. So, how did this happen again? Dud lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling in pure disbelief. Just moments ago, he had been swarmed by women, each one demanding his attention, claiming him in some way. And somehow, it all traced back to one thing: a survival game. Saviorizing, or SR for short. A fresh, youthful academy story packed with drama, romance, and just the right amount of weeboo energy. The characters were well written, the story engaging, and as usual, Dud had powered through it, cleared the game, and watched the ending roll. He felt accomplished, satisfied, done. Then the next day, bam, he woke up inside the game. No explanation, no logic, no sense. It wasn't like he had cursed at the game and been smited by some godly developer. He wasn't even that emotionally invested in the protagonist. And yet, here he was, stuck as Dud Campbell, the heir to a no-name viscountcy. A third-rate extra. The Campbell estate wasn't even special. Just farmland. Not a single dungeon in sight. Nothing remotely exciting. And yet, somehow, he had still managed to land in this mess. The Campbell Viscounty was barely a footnote in SR's feature film. So the idea of Dud, a mere Viscount's son, entering the Imperial Academy was practically world-shattering. And just like that, it was time to leave. Dud, flashing a light smile, bid farewell to his father. The man, eyes brimming with tears, clapped him on the shoulder, calling him the pride of their Viscounty. He reminded Dud to take care of himself, and, more importantly, to not cause trouble. The rest of the townsfolk had gathered too, all waving him off like he was heading to battle. Then, just as Dud turned to go, his father spoke up again. El Fonte is a place for noble heirs from across the empire, he warned. The best thing you can do is avoid drawing attention. Dud, already feeling the pressure, assured his father he'd stay out of trouble. And then, because fate had a terrible sense of humor, a system window popped up right in front of him. Stats displayed. Strength? F. Agility? F. Endurance? F. Luck? F. Authority? You guessed it, F. No skills. No proficiencies. No special gifts. Dud stared, utterly shattered. Even as a seasoned gamer, he had never seen such pathetically awful starting stats. Right on cue, the system popped up again. Main quest. Enter the academy and get appointed to A class. Dud's stomach dropped. He knew the rules. Ignoring a quest meant game over. And considering El Fonte Academy was basically a ticking time bomb thanks to the chaos caused by villains, he had zero intention of doing anything that might put his survival at risk. With that in mind, he turned back to his father, flashing a reassuring smile. Don't worry, they'll do my best to stay completely invisible. No unnecessary attention, no foolish dreams of raising our Viscounty's reputation. Nothing. His father, looking troubled, opened his mouth to object. They'll keep my grades below average too, Dud added, nodding to himself like he'd just crafted the perfect survival strategy. His father, now fully exasperated, tried again. That's not what I meant. But Dud wasn't listening. His path was clear. Stay low, stay safe, and absolutely stay out of trouble. Dud sat on the train, arms crossed, fully committed to his stay invisible and survive plan. The protagonist would handle all the chaos, so he'd just chill and embrace the peaceful life of a self-made loner. That was the plan, anyway. Instead, reality smacked him in the face because sitting right across from him, in the same carriage, was none other than Elnor La Tristan. Or, as she was better known, Elnor the Bloodthirsty. Elnor, the one with a mountain of corpses. Elnor, the final boss of this damn world. Dud nearly choked on air. In the game's storyline, Elnor and the protagonist clashed over and over, their battles escalating until her sanity shattered. That was when the dormant, gray demon awakened, consumed her body, and turned her into an unstoppable nightmare. An entity only the fully developed protagonist could hope to defeat. And now here she was, sitting right in front of him. Dud felt his survival rate plummet. Back in the present, Elnor sat calmly, flipping through a book, then glanced at Dud and asked if he needed a doctor. His complexion looked questionable at best. Dud, still reeling, waved his hands frantically. Nope, totally fine, no medical attention needed. Elnor nodded, then casually dropped a bombshell. Sitting here in second class instead of first was a calculated move, a way to show she was approachable despite her high-ranking noble status. If her presence made him uneasy, she sincerely apologized. In fact, everyone who had shared a carriage with her had worn the same expression he had. Dud blinked. This wasn't the Elnor he remembered. The game had painted her as a meritocratic perfectionist and audacious powerhouse. Yet, here she was showing consideration. Before he could process, Elnor tilted her head and asked why he wasn't answering. Did he have something else on his mind? Scratching his head, Dud blurted out the truth. He was just surprised by how kind she was. Elnor raised an eyebrow at Dud's comment, a flicker of curiosity crossing her face. Had he heard some unsavory rumors about her? Or had they met before? Dud immediately panicked. Nope, no bad rumors. Nothing scandalous. Had just heard she was, strict. Elnor sighed, eyeing him with mild amusement. Strange person. Dud, still flustered, nervously laughed. Yeah, I get that a lot. Internally, though, he was screaming. I'm just an extra. I do not get involved. Just shut up and look outside. So, he turned to the window. The scenery was breathtaking, stunning, majestic. Oh, and wait, were those boulders rolling toward them? Dud's expression froze. Correction, one massive boulder was heading straight for his face. Without thinking, he whipped around, calling out to Elnor, student council president, before lunging at her and wrapping his arms around her as tightly as possible. The impact came in an instant. Elnor's necklace, armor recognition, and creation for adult skeletons. Yes, that ridiculous name was real. Flared to life, its magic forming an invisible barrier that absorbed the collision. Dud clung to Elnor for dear life, not out of chivalry, but because he was an F-rank weakling who knew exactly what her artifact could do. Survival instincts at their finest. As the situation settled, Elnor lay on the floor, held by Dud. She asked if he was fine and could move, and Dud reassured her. Hearing this, Elnor pointed out that he was heavy, prompting Dud to quickly get up, blushing as he apologized for hugging her so suddenly. Elnor dismissed his apology, acknowledging that he had done it to save her from the falling boulder. Dud was surprised by her understanding, but she continued, admitting it was the first time a man had approached her so boldly. Despite that, she thanked him and insisted he had no reason to apologize. Still flustered, Dud thought to himself that he had only lunged at her to benefit from her armor, unsure how to respond. Elnor then asked for his name, catching him off guard. He hesitated, wondering if answering would lead to more encounters with her. While debating what to say, he eventually introduced himself as Dud Campbell. Elnor, hearing his name, assured him she wouldn't forget it and promised to repay him in the future. The system notification appeared, informing Dud that he had gained a villain's interest, meeting the conditions for a special gift. He received the skills Desperate Survival and Deadly Charm, leaving him momentarily confused. Meanwhile, due to the train's special security measures, casualties were minimal, and after a brief delay, the passengers who had been checked were ready to depart. Still in the carriage, Dud examined his newly acquired gift, Fate Attraction, which increased his chances of drawing interest from those with evil traits and rewarded him accordingly. He finally understood why he had never unlocked it before. Back in the Campbell Viscounty, finding someone neutral was rare, let alone anyone with evil traits. Since the gift was now available, he decided to check his new skills. Among them, Desperate Survival would be invaluable in battle, enhancing his ability to stay alive. Deadly Charm, on the other hand, made him question if he could truly possess such a skill, as it increased his appeal to those with evil traits. As he recalled individuals fitting that description, his panic grew. A berserk warrior who lost control after fights, a deranged sword god who cut down anyone within 3 steps, a ruthless assassin who killed for money, and a genius mage utterly numb to the world. Every one of them was troublesome, and Dud dreaded the thought of drawing their attention. As Dud processed his thoughts, his expression shifted. Survival was his priority, so gaining useful skills should be a good thing. However, what puzzled him was that the skill ranks weren't displayed. Even as an SR veteran, he had never encountered a skill without a rank, making him wonder what it meant. While he was lost in thought, a passenger sitting across from him asked if he was okay and if another psych assessment was necessary. Dud quickly dismissed the idea, insisting he was fine. Upon arriving at the academy, he looked far from satisfied. As he made his way to the hall for the headmaster's announcement, his mind remained preoccupied with what the man had told him on the way. The man, an El Fonte alumnus from a no-name noble family, mentioned hearing that Dud had been in the same carriage as Elnor. He pointed out that, as a Viscount son with no connections, Dud should consider the possibility that the boulder wasn't random. The Tristan Dukedom, which Elnor belonged to, had many enemies, making it no coincidence that her carriage had been targeted. The man advised Dud to stay away from Elnor, warning that associating with high-ranking nobles would only get him hurt. Dud nodded, saying he would keep that in mind, but deep down, he knew it was impossible. He was already entangled with Elnor, whether he liked it or not. In an academy filled with rumors and schemes, it was no surprise that Elnor was a candidate for the final boss. Just standing next to her felt like courting death. Before he could dwell further, a voice snapped him back to reality. A teacher called him out for spacing out while the other students mocked him as a country bumpkin. The teacher then pointed out that everyone had already chosen a sparring partner, except for Dud. That was when Dud remembered the entrance ceremony was immediately followed by the practical evaluation. The teacher announced that Dud's opponent had been automatically assigned. Realizing that the last unpaired student was likely the strongest, Dud braced himself and asked who it was. His fears were confirmed as his opponent greeted him with a calm smile, offering a hand. It was none other than Elia Crixinax, the world's greatest genius and the future savior, the protagonist of Savior Rising. Seeing her, Dud froze in shock and panic, completely at a loss for words. As Dud extended his hand toward Elia, he wondered if he was in serious trouble. Meanwhile, in another part of the academy, a woman was growing impatient, wondering where Elnor was. The entrance duels were underway, yet Elnor was late. One of her men hesitated before asking when Lady Tristan would arrive, but before she could respond, footsteps echoed behind them. Elnor appeared, her entire body drenched in blood, though she was completely uninjured. The woman, barely masking her frustration, told Elnor she had many questions, starting with where she had been. With a face smeared in someone else's blood, Elnor calmly replied that she had been handling some things. Taking a deep breath, the woman dismissed her subordinates, stating that she needed to speak with Elnor in private. Understanding the cue, they quickly left the room. Once alone, she asked if anyone had died. Elnor, without hesitation, confirmed that 12 had perished, the assassins who had tried to kill her. They had staged a bolder attack on the academy train, attempting to pass it off as an accident. However, she had uncovered their identities and, since she happened to be nearby, eliminated all of them. The woman told Elnor she should have left the matter to the school. Elnor dismissed the idea, saying it would be too troublesome. She then asked if the woman expected her to be just and forgiving, even towards someone who had just tried to kill her. The woman fell silent, unable to respond. Changing the subject, she told Elnor to get changed, mentioning that the entrance duels were underway. She added that if Elnor hurried, she could see Elia, a rare genius, fight a student named Dud Campbell. Elnor paused. "Did you say Dud Campbell?" The woman confirmed and asked if Elnor knew him, noting that Dud seemed unremarkable. Elnor recalled their past encounter and replied, "He's quite good." Meanwhile, in the arena, Dud stood holding a wooden sword, looking nervous. A student in the audience shouted at him to charge. Others whispered among themselves, betting on how many moves he would last. Some said he'd be lucky to escape without injury. Dud stood in a defensive stance, thinking his stats were absolute garbage. If he took a hit from Elia, he might as well be dead. His hands trembled, but he saw a silver lining. This dangerous situation activated his desperate survival, rank skill, which boosted his stats based on the threat level. He was certain some future villains were watching from the crowd. If he survived, he could at least draw their interest. With this advantage and his temporary stat buff, he might just make it. As he planned, Elias suddenly spoke. "Be honest, Dud. You're really weak, aren't you?" Dud panicked, stuttering, unsure how to respond. Seeing his reaction, Elias smirked, confirming her suspicion. Elias said she was going to give Dud a beatdown, but was hesitating now because she felt bad for him. Dud asked why she wanted to fight him. Elia explained that she heard he had been with Elnor earlier, and since she hated Elnor and the entire Tristan house, she was going to take it out on him. She called them demons and saw him as guilty by association. Dud thought she was bold for saying that, but also not entirely wrong. Elia had deep grudges against the Tristans, and he knew it was all family drama. He told her he had only been in the same room as Elnor, nothing more. Elia replied that it didn't matter. He still reminded her of Elnor, and she didn't like it. She added that he pissed her off, so she was going to hurt him. Then, she suddenly changed her expression and asked if they were just pretending to fight. Dud considered it and found the idea tempting. But if he didn't get stronger in the next 2 days, he would be in real danger. The only way to survive was to stand out in this fight. Still trembling, he told her to go all out. To provoke her further, he added that he actually liked Elnor very much. Elias' expression darkened as she gripped her wooden sword tighter and asked if he was serious. Dud knew he was lying, but told himself it was the only way to make Elia fight seriously. He then added that he was as serious as her hatred for Elnor. At that moment, the system popped up, notifying him that Deadly Charm had activated, greatly increasing the villain's attraction toward him. A reward had been added to his gift tab. Elia, hearing this, said she wouldn't feel bad about what she was about to do. She immediately charged, swinging her wooden sword and slicing Dud's weapon in half. He barely managed to dodge in time. Elia remarked that he wasn't as weak as she thought, but wasted no time attacking again, warning him that she would go even harder. Dud panicked as the system alerted him to a dangerous situation, triggering desperate survival at EX rank. A blue aura formed around his hand. Instinctively, he clenched his fist and threw a straight jab at Elia's face. Both of them froze in shock. Dud had just used a highest rank skill. As Dud's blow connected, Elia was sent flying at full speed, knocked unconscious on impact. The audience was stunned. Even Dud couldn't believe what he had just done. On his first day at Elfonte Academy, Dud Campbell, ranked F in all stats, had successfully subdued the world's main character. Meanwhile, in another location, a group had just finished watching the fight. One of them suggested that Dud might be a skilled fraud. Another argued that it made no sense. They all knew Dud had no combat skills before the duel, yet the strike he landed on Elia was undeniably real. Someone asked what he meant by real. The man explained that after taking a hit from Dud, no one at Elfonte would walk away unscathed, not even himself. He stated that the odds of Dud defeating Elia Crixinax, a potential future warrior, were 0. The only explanation was that Dud had used an illegal substance or tool to boost his strength. But then he added another possibility. Perhaps Dud was a monstrous genius. The room fell silent. A woman in the room spoke up, saying it was hard to accept Dud's victory as it was. She added that Margrave Kindred, Elia's sponsor, wouldn't stay silent. Another person pointed out that ignoring Dud would be a mistake. Losing a student with such potential would be a great loss for the academy. The woman agreed, but said it would soon be clear if Dud was a fraud. She advised them to wait and see. When asked what she meant, she explained that this year's admissions included some unique students requiring special treatment. If Dud was truly exceptional, he would find his role soon enough. Later, Dud's face appeared on the front page of the Academy newspaper, declaring him the new star after defeating Elia, the Academy's genius. As Dud read the article, the system popped up. Elnor's trust level increased to 2, granting him a new reward ready to claim. At the same time, interest in Dud surged. Figures like Baron Armit, Viscount Lupin, and others grew curious, earning him a massive point increase. Dud noticed that among those curious about him, Elnor had the highest interest. Thanks to this, he earned a large number of points for the point store. As he checked the messages, he wondered why Elnor, the final boss, who should have no interest in him, was suddenly so focused on him. The system then notified him of Elnor's gift rewards, granting him the Tristan sword technique. Shocked by the powerful skill, Dud quickly realized the problem. The Tristan household was tied to demons. Still, he decided to ignore that for now. The system also informed him that Elia's curiosity had risen to level 4, but he couldn't receive rewards from her. Seeing her name on his screen, he questioned why she was listed alongside villains. It became clear only villains with positive interest in him granted gifts, and Elia was neither a villain nor interested in him in a positive way. As Dud was lost in thought, a sudden knock on his door startled him. A voice called out, asking if the room belonged to Dud Campbell. The voice sounded familiar, but before he could figure out who it was, the person introduced themselves. It was Elia Crixinax, asking if she could come in. Shocked, Dud wondered why she was here. He considered staying silent, hoping she would leave. However, Elia warned that she knew he was inside and threatened to break the door if he didn't answer. Panicked, Dud shouted in fear, confirming his presence. Hearing that, Elia became serious and asked him to open the door, saying she had something to tell him. When Dud questioned what it was, she leaned against the door and replied that she just wanted to talk and get to know him better. Confused, Dud struggled to understand what was going on. Elia walked away, looking irritated. She muttered that Dud should have accepted her proposal, calling him uptight for refusing. Something felt off about him, she thought, then added that she had no idea how to befriend a man. As she walked, she accidentally bumped into someone, causing a paper bag to fall. Bending down to pick it up, she was about to apologize when the person spoke first, telling her to watch where she was going and asking if she was hurt. Hearing the voice, Elia looked up and froze. It was Elnor Tristan. Memories of her past grudges against the Tristan family flooded her mind, making her body tremble with anger. Instinctively, she reached for her weapon, preparing to strike if needed. Realizing her reaction, she hesitated, wondering if she could defeat Elnor at her current level. Elnor, however, showed no hostility. She simply extended her hand and asked for her bag back. Elia, caught off guard, felt confused. This was not the reaction she had expected. Elia handed the bag to Elnor, wondering about Dud's connection to her. As Elnor took the bag and walked away, she casually mentioned that taking a right down the hallway would lead to Dud Campbell's room. Elia paused, then called out, asking how Elnor knew where Dud's room was. Elnor stopped and asked why Elia had been with Dud. Noticing Elnor's sudden hostility, Elia felt confused. She explained that she just wanted to be friends with Dud since he was a new student. Elnor, unfazed, stated that new students were forbidden from mingling with the opposite sex. Elia, baffled, questioned if such a rule even existed. Elnor doubled down, declaring that she had just made one. Elia was now forbidden from visiting Dud's room. Still confused, Elia asked about Elnor's relationship with Dud. Elnor replied that Dud meant nothing to her, but firmly told Elia to remember what she had just said. Elia recalled Dud's words from their fight and decided that, even if just for information, she needed to stay close to him. Outside the academy, Dud remembered the class assignment exam from when he played the game. The exam analyzed every aspect of a student, sorting them into groups based on a one-on-one duel. Since Dud had defeated a warrior candidate, he was placed in the highest level group. While others looked proud of their assignments, he was the only one looking uneasy. His biggest concern was the girl standing behind him, Elia. Despite pushing her away yesterday, she was now in the same group as him. The system displayed Elias' curiosity level, stating that rewards were still unavailable but hinting at a special event when her interest status changed. Seeing her curiosity rise again, Dud was baffled. Recalling the previous night, he remembered receiving snacks and a letter, leading him to suspect someone was stalking him. He couldn't understand why all of this was happening now. One of the teachers announced that it was Group 1's turn for the exam. Dud took a deep breath, telling himself to focus. He expected the exam to be straightforward since it was part of the main scenario. Just then, a woman stepped forward. It was Elnor. She greeted the students and announced that she would be overseeing their exam. Dud was stunned. He knew the Elnor event was supposed to happen that day, but he hadn't expected her to be in charge of his exam. If she was involved, something was bound to happen. Meanwhile, moments earlier, the academy's leaders were in a meeting. One of them stated that if Dud was truly a genius capable of defeating a warrior candidate, they needed to see how he performed in the class assignment. Another suggested having the student president oversee the exam, leading to the current situation. Back in the present, Elnor, in a commanding tone, instructed the students to proceed to the exam area. She would take questions once they arrived. As the students arrived at the exam site, Luca commented on the effort put into the setup, but his classmate told him to stay quiet and follow along. The students were impressed by the area's design, but suddenly the lights went out, plunging the room into darkness. Elia asked Elnor if this was part of the test, but Elnor remained silent. Dud, however, knew the answer. The entrance was sealed and the power had failed. The system then confirmed his suspicion, notifying him that the Elnor event was now active. This was not a test, but a trap. A second notification appeared, revealing that assassins were still targeting Elnor, and Dud's task was to protect her. As the students discussed their next move, Dud observed them carefully. He realized that everyone present was a key member of the main character's party. If he recalled correctly, this was where they all first met, making each of them crucial to the story. Dud pointed at a map in the room and suggested moving to the central hall, the most logical choice. The students, surprised to see a map, listened as he explained that the hall likely had equipment, rescue supplies, and, most importantly, open space, making it easier to defend against ambushes. They were startled when he mentioned the word ambush. He then turned to Elia and Elnor, stating that they must have sensed it too. They weren't alone. Dud announced he would head elsewhere, prompting Elia to question why. He insisted it was necessary, but she pressed him further, pointing out that his destination was far from the hall. Dud, now serious, admitted he couldn't explain yet, but promised to do so later. Dud reassured himself that his decision wasn't a lie. Nothing was more important than his own survival. Walking in the opposite direction, he took a deep breath, relieved that his excuse had worked. He figured his previous victory over Elia had given his words some credibility. His plan was simple: hide until the event ended. The assassins were after Elnor, not him, so he just needed to find a quiet corner and wait it out. But as he thought this, a voice called out. A man with a menacing tone claimed he was there to fix the power and asked for help, mentioning his poor eyesight in the dark. At that moment, the system alerted Dud, danger detected. In another part of the academy, one of the students, looking more than a little worried, glanced at Elia and asked if she thought Dud would be okay on his own. She couldn't shake the feeling that something might happen to him, especially since he was completely alone. But Elia, calm as ever, dismissed the concern with a steady voice. Whatever Dud was up to, she said, he must have had a plan. Worrying about him wouldn't help right now. Besides, there was something else they needed to focus on. As she spoke, Elia's sharp eyes scanned the surroundings, and that was when she noticed it. The others must have sensed it too because, one by one, they followed her gaze. A cold shiver ran through the group as realization set in. They were completely surrounded. Assassins. Meanwhile, in a different part of the academy, Dud walked alongside the mysterious man who had barged in just moments ago. The stranger, silent and calculating, mulled over the situation in his mind. The advance party had been wiped out. That devilish woman, Elnor, was responsible. But, he mused, that had only happened because he hadn't been there. Things would be different now. And as for the boy walking beside him, the fool had been tricked so easily. It was almost amusing. As they walked, Dud finally spoke, pointing ahead to a door. That, he said, was the equipment room. The man barely acknowledged the words, his thoughts occupied with something far more entertaining. A professional assassin like him could gauge a person's ability just by watching their movements. And this Dud? Oh, he was a complete rookie. A menacing smile curled onto his lips. He had some time to kill before getting to the real fun. So why not play with his prey a little? And when he was done, Dud's body would be just another obstacle removed from his path. Lady Tristan was next. At that moment, the man finally spoke, his voice laced with amusement as he removed the undercover mask he had been wearing. A menacing smile stretched across his face as he thanked Dud for leading him straight to the equipment room, adding that Dud had earned himself a reward for his efforts. Dud, however, let out a sigh of relief the moment he saw the man's face. Of course, he said, just as expected, it was none other than Hazmed. That caught Hazmed off guard. He hadn't expected Dud to recognize him so easily. But before he could say anything, Dud kept going, casually noting that if it had been someone even slightly stronger, he might have actually been in trouble. Luckily for him, Hazmed still walked the same way, still carried himself the same way, just the same old guy Dud remembered. Hazmed blinked. What was this kid even talking about? He was actually a loss for words. Not that it mattered. Dud was still a weakling at the end of the day, and Hazmed wasn't about to waste any more time. Without another thought, he drew his weapon, eyes gleaming with intent, and lunged straight at Dud. In another part of the academy, the so-called assassins were getting their butts thoroughly handed to them. The students barely broke a sweat as they handled the situation with ease, every single one of them making quick work of their opponents. Elia, effortlessly dodging and countering attacks, couldn't help but think that these assassins were way easier to deal with than she had expected. Honestly, it was almost disappointing. But as that thought crossed her mind, her focus shifted. Elnor, how was she handling things? As it turned out, Elnor wasn't just handling things, she was obliterating them. A single strike from her was enough to cut down multiple assassins at once. And she moved through the battlefield like a force of nature, not even remotely phased. Once there were no enemies left standing, she approached one of the assassins still groaning on the ground. Without hesitation, she leaned in and asked him if there were any more assassins lurking around. And just to make sure he knew she was serious, she casually added that if he didn't answer, she would break his heart, literally. The man immediately let out a terrified scream. Moments later, he spilled everything. Yes, there was still one more assassin. A dangerous one. Hazmed of the Crescent Moon. Elnor's eyes narrowed as she processed the name. She wasted no time and pressed further, asking if Hazmed was inside the building or somewhere nearby. But at that, the man clamped up, shaking his head. That, he said, he couldn't answer. Just as the man finished speaking, Elnor stomped his head straight into the ground without a shred of hesitation. The assassin let out a scream of pure agony, but Elnor wasn't feeling particularly patient. She asked again, was Hazmed here? Was he lurking nearby? The man, barely able to breathe through the pain, finally cracked. Yes, Hazmed had come along with them. That was when Elia stepped forward, watching Elnor with a curious look. What, she asked, was driving her to go this far? Elnor didn't hesitate. The assassins had tried to kill her, plain and simple. And Hazmed of the Crescent Moon? He wasn't just any assassin. He had the ability to take on another person's appearance, but only after killing them. Which brought her to the real question. Who right now would be the easiest target for Hazmed in this entire building? Elias' eyes widened as the realization hit her. Now that she thought about it, there was one person who wasn't with him right now. Dud. The rest of the students froze at the realization. Had Dud seriously used himself as bait to lure out the strongest enemy? Elia, still trying to wrap her head around it, pointed out that the assassins were after Elnor, not Dud. So why in the world would Dud go this far? What was his connection to Elnor? Elnor, unbothered, immediately shut down the idea. Nothing, she said. Absolutely nothing. As far as she knew, at least. Elia narrowed her eyes at that. Now, she was really starting to wonder. In another part of the academy, Hazmed was having some serious second thoughts. He was a professional assassin, a master of the trade, and yet here he was getting absolutely manhandled. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. The Guardian Soul was supposed to be a barrier that blocked slashing attacks, only reacting to weaponry. So why in the world was it here of all places? Then again, this school was ancient and full of mysteries, so maybe it made sense. Not that it mattered. An assassin was a weapon themselves. Or at least, that's what Hazmed told himself, until he found himself getting pummeled by someone who should have been a weakling. Meanwhile, as Dud clashed with Hazmed, a notification suddenly flashed before him. The system informed him that he had successfully performed the sword technique, and with that, his proficiency in the Tristan sword technique had increased. Hazmed's eyes widened. The Tristan sword technique? That wasn't something just anyone could wield. For the first time, doubt crept into his mind. Maybe, just maybe, he had seriously miscalculated. He should never have messed with Dud in the first place. Letting out a breath, Hazmed spoke up, his voice edged with disbelief. It seemed he admitted that Dud had been the one who baited him, not the other way around. And now, Hazmed wanted to know, who exactly was Dud? Dud, however, just stared at him completely lost. What was this guy even talking about? Before he could even process it, another system notification popped up. Deadly Charm had been activated. The villain was now in awe of Dud's intricate, well-thought-out plan. Dud blinked. Wait, what plan? Dud smirked to himself. Thanks to the game system, weapons couldn't be used at the save point, which was exactly why he had lured Hazmed here in the first place. Strategy over strength. Hazmed, looking battered, bruised, and utterly defeated, let out a tired breath. So, he said, Dud wasn't going to answer his question. Fine. Then Dud might as well just finish the job and kill him, since there was nothing else left for him to do. But Dud simply shook his head. He wasn't going to kill Hazmed. That actually caught Hazmed off guard. He raised a brow, asking why in the world Dud would let him live. Dud didn't hesitate. Instead, he told Hazmed to go spread the word. Let everyone know that Lady Tristan was off limits. And just to make it crystal clear, Hazmed should also mention that even an assassin of his level had barely made it out alive. As he spoke, Dud's mind raced. He still didn't know who had sent these assassins, but whoever it was, they weren't going to stop. And if they kept trying, the chances of Elnor's gray demon being unleashed would only increase. That was a disaster waiting to happen. Better to shut down that possibility right now before it spiraled into something worse. Hazmed, despite his wounds, let out a low chuckle and flashed a menacing smile. But what, he asked, would happen if he came back? Dud's expression turned serious. Without missing a beat, he met Hazmed's gaze and told him straight. He could try again if he wanted, but the result would be the same. Dud would still be there, protecting Elnor. Next time too. Hazmed narrowed his eyes and asked if Lady Tristan Elnor was really that important to Dud. Without a second thought, Dud answered, yes, she was. Hazmed wasn't expecting that. For a moment, he just stared, genuinely surprised. But before Dud could even process Hazmed's reaction, the system popped up again. Deadly Charm activated. The villain's favorability has risen exponentially. And then, for some reason, it kept repeating. The favorability has risen exponentially. The favorability has risen exponentially. Dud frowned. What? What was even happening? Why was the system acting like this? Then, as he turned around, it all made sense. Standing right behind him, completely silent, was Elnor, watching. Just watching. Dud suddenly had a bad feeling about this. Meanwhile, inside the academy, a woman was slumped over her desk, resting her head on the table with an exhausted sigh. What a complete mess. She understood why the Chancellor was furious. Really, she did. But why was she suddenly being ordered to track down the organizer immediately? As if that was something she could just snap her fingers and do. And to make things worse, she already had a mountain of work piling up. With another groan, she muttered to herself that the academy was an absolute disaster right now. And now that it was confirmed there was a spy involved, given how precise the timing and route of the assassination were, things were only getting worse. The woman let out a tired sigh and glanced at Elnor, who was seated across the room. She knew political schemes targeting Elnor were nothing new, but given that this was already the second assassination attempt, the opposition had to be seriously determined. Elnor, however, wasn't exactly engaged in the conversation. She was staring up at the ceiling, completely lost in thought, and when she finally responded, all she said was, "I wonder." The woman frowned, but pushed on. This incident felt different. Whoever was behind it wasn't done yet. That much was certain. And as for the people who had been with Elnor during the attack, they had all been formally recognized for their efforts. Well, almost all of them. Despite the flawless outcome, every assassin taken down, no casualties, there was still one glaring anomaly. Dud Campbell. He was the only one without a single record of commendation, which didn't make sense. There was no reason for him not to have one. It was almost as if he was deliberately staying off the Academy's radar. Elnor, still staring at the ceiling, gave the same response. "I wonder." That was the last straw. The woman's patience snapped, and she huffed, warning Elnor that if she repeated that one more time, she was getting smacked. Without missing a beat, Elnor simply tilted her head and told her to go ahead. The woman had reached her limit. Without a second thought, she grabbed a bottle of ink and hurled it straight at Elnor, demanding to know what was wrong with her. Elnor, with effortless grace, caught the bottle mid-air and raised an eyebrow. What exactly did the woman mean by that? Frustrated, the woman crossed her arms and pointed out that Elnor had been completely out of it all day. She hadn't been paying attention to anything, and if she wasn't going to explain what was going on, then the woman wasn't about to waste her time helping her anymore. Elnor finally sighed, tilting her head slightly. There was someone who had caught her interest. That answer made the woman pause. "Wait, what?" Elnor repeated herself. Someone had piqued her curiosity. Now, intrigued, the woman pressed for a name. Elnor merely smirked and hinted that the name had already been mentioned in their conversation. The woman's eyes narrowed as she pieced it together, and then it hit her. Dud Campbell. Silence. Elnor didn't deny it, which was more than enough confirmation. The woman threw up her hands in disbelief. Of all people, Dud? That country bumpkin? Elnor, completely unfazed, simply shrugged and pointed out that she never actually said that. The woman let out an exasperated sigh. She had no idea what kind of magic Dud had worked to capture Elnor's interest, but one thing was certain. If Archduke Tristan caught wind of this, it wouldn't be pretty. Elnor didn't even flinch. Oh, the old geezer would definitely throw a fit. Not that it mattered, because, as she clearly stated, she did not fancy Dud. The woman, however, was far from convinced. Elnor's behavior was practically screaming otherwise. Still, she shook her head and decided to move on. Regardless of how Dud had pulled it off, the fact remained, he treated Elnor kindly. And that was the strangest part. Normally, Elnor would be suspicious of anyone being nice to her, so she really ought to be more careful. A lady of House Tristan couldn't afford to be reckless. Elnor tapped a finger against her chin, admitting that the woman had a point. But that was precisely why she had to test Dud. If she simply observed him a little more closely, she would figure things out. The woman squinted. Test him? What was that supposed to mean? Meanwhile, in a different part of the academy, Dud lay on his bed, staring at a piece of paper in his hands. As he read the words over and over, a deep frown settled on his face. What in the world was this supposed to mean? The letter stated that, unfortunately for Dud Campbell, the academy was currently unable to determine his class. Apparently, the academic team was in the middle of some project to obtain optimal results, whatever that meant, and he should expect good news in the future. Dud groaned, running a hand through his hair. Yeah, that's not suspicious at all. Dud sighed as he read the letter, rubbing his temple in frustration. Expect good news? Yeah, no thanks. Just throw me into some random class and move on. Though if they were actually following the academy's rules, he should be placed in a special class, right alongside Elias' party. So why was he left out? Before he could dwell on it any longer, the system suddenly popped up with a notification. Main quest completed. Great. At least something was going right. New information updated. All right, sure. Main quest activated. Resolve the incident at the freshman reception ceremony. Reward. Exclusive equipment material. And there it was. Another headache waiting to happen. The freshman reception ceremony was a pretty big deal. That was where a student's class would be determined. Archer, warrior, mage, priest, and so on based on their abilities and combat focus. Elia, for example, wielded a sword, so her path was already set. As for Dud, he figured he'd go for a strength-focused build. That way, he'd score some exclusive equipment that matched his style. But as he scrolled through the system, a nagging problem made itself painfully obvious. The final boss, the protagonist, and the main quest event were all happening at the same time. Dud groaned, dragging a hand down his face. Oh yeah, something big is definitely about to go down. Just as Dud was still reeling from his last revelation, the system popped up yet again. Elnor's gift reward acquired. 1 skill duplication pass. You may copy 1 skill from the target. Dud's eyes widened. Wait, what? This was insane. Absolutely busted. A free pass to steal any skill? That meant he could straight up copy the final boss abilities. But as tempting as it was, using it now would be a total waste. Sure, Elnor was already at the top of the Academy's food chain, but just like Elia, she was the final boss. She was only going to get stronger. And Elia? Well, she was bound to rack up a ridiculous amount of cheat skills as the story progressed. So yeah, there was zero reason to burn the pass now. For the time being, all he needed to do was focus on the event in 3 days. Fortunately, he had a little trick up his sleeve to make sure he survived it. Fast forward to nightfall, and Dud was fully decked out in stealth gear, blending into the darkness like a shadow. Dressed head to toe in black, he now stood in front of the old equipment warehouse, ready to put his plan into action. The system chimed in. Haste potion, agility increased. Shadow mask, agility increased. Catwalk shoes, silent footsteps acquired. Dud grinned as he glanced at the buffs stacked on him. Man, it's nice having access to the point store. After slipping past every security measure like a seasoned pro, Dud finally arrived at his prize, the legendary SR-tier treasure farming spot. Without wasting a second, he grabbed the fence and vaulted right over it like it was nothing. As soon as his feet touched the ground, the system chimed in. Vitality recovery biscuit activated. Stamina recovery boosted beyond imagination. Dud blinked. That sounded like a sales pitch. But, hey, the effect was real, so he wasn't complaining. Shaking off the thought, he refocused on the task at hand. Time to loot. As he scanned the scattered materials and forgotten relics littering the ground, his eyes darted back and forth. Plenty of valuable stuff, sure, but not the thing he was here for. Just as he was about to grumble about it, his gaze landed on something gleaming in the dim light. Found it. The Ultrama of Divinity, an ancient incense burner infused with the power of 1,000 years. Jackpot. With a satisfied nod, he secured the relic. That was everything he needed. Now all that was left was to... A creaking noise interrupted his thoughts. Dud froze. Slowly, he turned his head. The towering piles of loot, stacked haphazardly like a disaster waiting to happen, were finally giving in to gravity. Oh no, he had known things were going too smoothly. Of course something had to go wrong. The last thing he saw before impact was the avalanche of junk collapsing on top of him. Yep, called it. As the dust settled, Dud stood amidst the chaos, blinking in confusion. In his arms, held bridal style, no less, was a woman. Not just any woman. Yuria Greyhouncher, the cursed sword goddess herself. The boss of Chapter 2. Dud's brain short-circuited. Why? Because the relic he had just swiped? Yeah, it was originally hers. Meaning, of course, that she was supposed to be here. Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Before he could even process the mess he had just landed himself in, Yuria stirred. Her eyes snapped open, sharp as a blade, and without a word, she launched herself out of his grasp, retreating like he was the plague. At the same time, the system decided to make things worse. Warning, a life-threatening situation has been detected. Activating desperate survival, EX rank. Oh no. Dud barely had time to apologize for waking her up before Yuria moved, fast. In a blur, she drew her weapon, a wickedly sharp chain, and lashed out. Without thinking, Dud dodged. Barely. This wasn't a friendly spar like before. Back then, his fight with Elia was just a duel. This was a full-blown deathmatch. He tried to reason with her, ducking and weaving as the chain whizzed past his face. This is just a misunderstanding. He wasn't planning anything weird. He was just borrowing some valuables while she was asleep. But his words barely left his mouth before a sharp jolt of pain ran through him. Even with his EX rank survival skills kicking in, his whole body ached. Yeah, this was definitely not going to be an easy fight. Yuria, completely unfazed by Dud's desperate pleas, kept up her relentless assault. He could swear he had repeated, "This is just a misunderstanding," at least 10 times by now, but she didn't seem to care. Not even a little. Without hesitation, she swung her weapon, a vicious sword attached to a chain of iron steel, and hurled it straight at him. Dud barely dodged, his brain racing. All right, think. Luckily, he already knew the trick to surviving this. 3.5 steps. That was the golden rule. Anyone who stepped within that range of Yuria lost. No exceptions. The moment they got too close, it was over. But in exchange, Yuria herself couldn't move forward. That was the mechanism behind her curse. Yuria's voice cut through the air, sharp as her blade. Can you take a step forward? Dud narrowed his eyes. Oh, I see how it is. You just want me to walk into my own doom, don't you? And, just as expected, she didn't even try to deny it. She simply nodded and said, exactly. Dud, still dodging for his life, suddenly had a realization. This wasn't just any battleground. This was Yuria's territory. She had been forced into isolation. Even the academy's teaching staff avoided this place. Meaning, Dud smirked. He could work with this. Dud, still dodging for his life, suddenly had a genius idea. Without missing a beat, he called out to Yuria, hey, you want a biscuit? That stopped her in her tracks. For a split second, Yuria's expression flickered between deadly assassin and confused puppy. She clearly hadn't expected that. Dud, taking full advantage of her hesitation, pulled out a bag of biscuits and held them up like a prized treasure. The system popped up with a helpful description. Biscuit of energy recovery. Restores stamina like never before. Perfect, Dud thought. People were always hungry in situations like this. He figured Yuria wasn't any different. Yuria, however, quickly snapped out of her daze and narrowed her eyes. Do you really think you can bribe me with food? She sounded completely unimpressed. Dud didn't argue. Instead, he simply grabbed a biscuit and tossed it into the air. And just like that, Yuria lunged for it. With precision that could only be described as instinctual, she caught the biscuit in her mouth before it could even hit the ground. Dud blinked. Did she just… Yes. Yes, she did. She had snatched the biscuit out of the air like an actual puppy. A few moments later, after devouring the rest of the biscuits, Yuria finally spoke again. Fine. They'll believe that what happened earlier was just a mistake. Dud, still processing what just happened, let out a long sigh of relief. He had definitely almost died back there. Yuria, still chewing on a biscuit, suddenly leaned closer and, with a mouthful of crumbs, demanded, so, who exactly are you and what are you doing here? Dud had, in fact, come here to steal. But there was absolutely no way he could say that to Yuria. Thinking fast, he plastered on his most innocent expression and said, Oh, I'm just here because someone asked me to feed you. Yuria blinked, clearly caught off guard. Someone asked you to feed me? Dud nodded solemnly. Yep, a very important person told me to look after you. Of course, this was complete nonsense, but Yuria didn't know that. And besides, leaving things vague like this could be useful later. There was no way players ever got to meet Yuria this early in the game. Before she could press for details, Dud smoothly changed the subject. By the way, you don't need to worry about your sister. She's doing just fine in the Holy Empire. Yuria, who had been eyeing him with suspicion, suddenly looked relieved. Dud continued, and don't worry about the Emperor, either. He's not going to bother with you or your sister for a while. But that said, you should still keep a low profile. Satisfied with that little nugget of wisdom, Dud stood up, brushing off his clothes. Anyway, we'll be back here soon. Yuria, originally from the Holy Empire, had gone into hiding in El Fonte because of them. Her sword, an infamous cursed relic, had doomed her to a life of isolation as its binding vessel. The three-step curse was a cruel joke, trapping her in place while the rest of the world moved on without her. Dud thought about all this for a moment. Yeah, he figured it was fine to tell her about the one family member she had left. After everything she had been through, she deserved at least that much. The next day arrived, and with it came the grand tour of the academy, led by none other than Housemaster Ophelia. She had just finished showing the students around, the Grand Academy building, the expansive gym, and the arcane hall, each more impressive than the last. The students, fully aware that this was important information, listened carefully. With a clap of her hands, Ophelia gathered their attention. Now, then listen up. In a few days, during the freshman reception ceremony, you'll all be choosing your majors and minors. No pressure, of course, just a tiny decision that might shape your entire future. She then listed the 5 departments available: knighthood, spellcraft, engineering, production, and clergy. As soon as she finished, a student in the crowd raised a hand. Excuse me, does the Tribal Association teach the same subjects as the Holy Empire? Ophelia smiled. Sharp question. Yes, we do. We follow the same curriculum as the Furnace of Battle and the Great Temple, so don't even think about transferring. We got everything you need right here. With that, she waved her hand and moved on. Now let's talk about majors. Meanwhile, standing in the back, Dud wasn't paying attention to any of that. This was the tutorial event. The moment where players got crucial world-building details. The moment where everything was laid out neatly for them, if they paid attention. And skipping it? After all the effort he had put in so far? Yeah, no, that would be disastrous. That is all for today. Thanks for watching.